my talk. Here we go. How he said he living life as a gringo. Where you question where you fit in every time you mingle. They say you do this with not enough that. My rapping is really bad. This life as a gringo.
Yes, hello and welcome to another episode of Life as a Gringo. I am Dramos. Of course, it is Thursday, so that means it's time for our Thursday Trends episode. And I think we all know what I'm going to be talking about today. The shocking results of the 2024 presidential election here in the United States of America. Donald Trump getting elected, defeating Kamala Harris. Yeah, I'm just going to kind of touch on that a little bit, and I'm not even going to go, like, hardcore news here. I just want to check in, because I know a lot of people are going through it and trying to wrap their brain around on all this, and I'll touch on the Puerto Rico election as well. That was a disappointing result. But yeah, let's just have a conversation amongst friends here. So we'll touch on it in a segment we call For the People in the Back.
Say it louder for the people in the Say it louder for the people in the back.
So I, like many of you, and I don't want to say we are everybody who listens to this show is Democrat or voted for Kamala Harris. I don't want to be ignorant to that. And I think the vast majority of you, from the feedback I get, are supporters of, at least just non-supporters of Donald Trump, right? And so for many of us, we watched as the results were coming in on Tuesday night. Personally, I probably stayed up until about 12-ish and kind of felt like I was seeing the writing on the wall, and was just like, I'm going to go to bed. And I couldn't even sleep that night, quite honestly. And, early in the morning when I, got up after finally falling asleep, I looked at my phone and saw the official results come in. And like many of you, I was disappointed, and I had talked about this a little bit with the Just Be Social Club, a private mastermind group that we have. And I had made some social media posts kind of just, candidly letting you know how I was feeling for those who cared. But yeah, it's tough, and what makes it particularly tough is how this was really just a blowout win for Donald Trump. How he not only won, electorally as far as the Electoral College goes, but he also won the popular vote, which means that more people in the United States of America voted for him than Kamala Harris, right? It didn't even come down to, electoral delegates and things of that nature. He literally just outright beat her in pretty much every way. And I think it raises a lot of questions. It raises a lot of thoughts, emotions, feelings. I think for many of us, particularly when you talk about our community, I know for me, I question, how do I exist in a world where the idea of the villainization of my people has not only been normalized, but supported, or at the very least, wasn't a deal breaker for people, right? And I think that is one of the tough things to kind of wrap your brain around, that people were able to see words coming out of his mouth, his associates, and it wasn't enough for them to say, you know what? Politics aside, loyalty to a particular party aside, I can't in good conscience vote for somebody who runs a campaign based upon hatred and speaks that way about other human beings, other Americans. And unfortunately, from the results, we see that the majority of America didn't really give a fuck about the comments he had made or those associated with him had made, or the platform of hatred that he ran his campaign on. And I think that's particularly hard to wrap our brain around. I think also just the downright misogyny. The idea that we still live in a country where people can't seem to wrap their brain around the idea that a woman could do the same job as a man. You know, I heard plenty of people, and I've seen plenty of people, and even women included, other women included, talking about how they just don't think a woman could do the job of president, right? As if gender has anything to do with your ability to lead or your qualifications, right? And then you tack on she's a woman of color and all these things, and just common narratives that you heard coming out from people who opposed her. I just don't like her, right? And they never really had a real reason. They just said they just don't like her. Something about her rubs them the wrong way. And I think that's a bit of dog whistling, or people who don't want to come face to face with their own misogyny or racism. Because I don't see how on the other side of it you look at Donald Trump, all that he does, the way he speaks and everything, and say, yeah, I don't mind the way he presents himself. Meanwhile, you have this articulate, well-educated woman, a bevy of credentials, and just something about her bothers you. You know, I think a lot of people don't want to come to face with that reality, that they have some racist issues, that they have some misogynistic viewpoints, and it's easier to just say, I don't like her. And on the topic of, like, women's reproductive rights, I mean, you have MAGA people bragging, you know, and talking about online, we own your bodies now, celebrating the Trump win. I think about my friends in the LGBTQ plus community, you know, who, as a artist, as a DJ, as a creative, have welcomed me with open arms into their spaces and given me platforms to express myself and to perform and to make money and to do the thing that I love doing, and who have become friends of mine beyond just that, beyond just the work relationship. And I think about how their lives could be affected because of the hatred from the other side, from the side that's going to be in power come January. What does that mean for their rights, for their way of living, their quality of life, their ability to love who they want and to have the right to express themselves just like anybody else? And it scares me and it makes me sad, you know? And truthfully, I think for me, I'm not shocked, you know, and maybe there's a part of me that's just a bit calloused from, you know, so much of just a crazy year. And I've mentioned this on the podcast and in my personal life and career and all these different things. It only sort of selfishly seemed like, yeah, this would be kind of how things play out, what would be like the cherry on top for this year, if you will. And I know that's like a negative mindset. It's not a healthy one, but it's, you know, these are real thoughts that come across my mind. And I think also I don't know, I think I was on the phone with my mom yesterday morning, and she was like, how are you feeling? And I was just kind of like indifferent. I think there's a part of me that is just, I'm not defeated, but I'm definitely drained by just the bullshit and having to deal with it on a regular basis, you know? And I had mentioned this to some of the members of the Just Be Social Club when I kind of was communicating back and forth. I live in New Jersey, and New Jersey is like a purple state. There's a lot of Trump supporters, and where I actually live these days is in the suburbs, and it's a red county. So, every day I'm interacting with these people and seeing them, with their lawn signs and their gigantic truck flags. And, for whatever reason in the nightlife industry around here, a lot of the people are Trump supporters, and, they're coming at me on social media, and these are people I have to run into in real life as well. And it's just awkward, interactions and all these things. And I think a part of me, that's why I wasn't necessarily like as disappointed as I wasn't shocked by the results, because I feel like I see so much of this in my everyday life that I realize just how big the MAGA movement and ideology is. So it's not shocking to me that this would be the results. And yeah, I think it's just incredibly, I think the word I would say is just disappointing. And I'm trying not to get ahead of myself. And maybe I should be, but I'm trying not to get too ahead of myself of like the fear of what this means moving forward. I personally am trying to have enough belief in our system and the guardrails that it doesn't mean the, sort of end of the country as we know it. Time will tell. I will be paying close attention. But I think right now I'm just kind of numb to it all. I think I'm just, I don't know. I'm just tired. I'm tired right now. Right in this moment, I'm tired of fighting it. I'm tired of, the back and forth almost. And I think I'm compartmentalizing probably a little bit. And maybe it'll really begin to like wash over me as the weeks go on or whatever it is. I think for me, and I mentioned this on socials, because I see a lot of the back and forth. I see some people like, it's just politics. It shouldn't ruin friendships or whatever it is, relationships. And then other people I've seen who are like, if you voted for Trump, fuck you and unfollow me type of thing. And I get that. I get that inclination, right? I feel it in my bones. How can I interact with people who supported someone that is morally just reprehensible, but morally corrupt, but also went after my community, and as a result has put a target on the backs of my community, the people that I've made it a point to fight for and advocate for. How do I have you as a part of my life when you're okay with supporting that? And I think in a normal context, a normal election, I've said this pre-2016, I think, Republican, Democrat, we all kind of interact, and it's not really based on anything more than political views, right? An ideology of what's the best route for this country, best policies. But now it's become personal. Now it is about who I am as a person. It's about things that I can't change, right? It's about my ethnicity, my background, about the things that make me me, and those things putting a target on my back because of the rhetoric of this person. And I guess the best piece of advice I can give anybody who's seeking it, the way that I sort of operate, I keep people at a distance, I'm I'm very conscious of where I go, who I'm around. I have a small circle. I'm do my best to not put myself in environments where I'm going to be having to sort of numb myself because of the conversations that are happening, or where I just don't feel physically safe. And I think there are going to be plenty of interactions where you can't completely avoid it, right? We all share this common space that is Earth, and that is the United States of America. And I kind of, I again keep people at a distance. I equate it to, there are times when you're in a job in an office or whatever, you're working on a project, and you have to interact with people that you don't fuck with, right? Coworkers that you would never hang out with outside of work. And you do your best to be cordial for the sake of getting the job done, but you don't go above and beyond, and you don't have any other expectations for them. And quite frankly, they probably don't have any other expectations for you. And that's kind of how I view this and how I navigate. I'm going to have to interact with people. I'm going to have to work at places where the common narrative or ideology among some of the people might not be in line with what I believe. I do my best to avoid those places, but there are times where it's just unavoidable. And I do what I have to do, and I get out. I don't do anything extra. You're not going to get, extra friendly interactions out of me. And that's that. I'm okay with that. Family is another tough one. I have family through marriage who are Trump supporters, and for a while I've kind of kept that boundary. I go to events for my niece and nephew, and that's that. I show up late, I leave early. I am not there to politic with any of them more than I have to. I am there to participate in my niece and nephew's life, and that's it. And once I feel drained by the situation, I'm gone. I'm good. And that's how I've been navigating, And that's the only, I guess, the best piece of advice I can give people, because I don't think we should just be out in the streets screaming at each other and, fist fighting one another, whatever it is. I think if you really do love this country and want what's best for it, participating in those types of actions is obviously not best for us. And I always do believe in taking a bit of the higher ground. So I think, to me, that's the healthiest way I can look at it and interact and, still do what needs to get done in this life, but not put myself in a position to have to interact with people who don't value me or my background or where I come from, or think less of it, or quite frankly hate me. So yeah, that's the best piece of advice I can give you. And I want to touch on a couple little nuances that were interesting, because I know one of the big headlines is Latin men. So we will touch on that. We'll pause here, though. We'll take a quick break, and then we'll be right back. All right, we are back, and I want to touch on one of the big headlines, because obviously Latin men coming out in support of Trump, I believe it was above half. It was over 50%, if I'm not mistaken. Something like close to 60% of Latinos voted for Trump. And I think there's a lot to unpack there. I've suggested this before, but I think Bala Ramos's book, Defectors, is a great starting place to kind of start to wrap your brain around some of the mindset. I think also the Republican Party has really targeted Latinos. I mean, Fox News even had an hour Spanish-speaking show. There's been a lot of misinformation and disinformation being targeted social media-wise towards Latin communities, and a lot of propaganda being placed over there. And I think also we have to have a real conversation about machismo culture, I think, to a degree, because there's a stark increase in Latin men voting for Trump in this election. And yeah, there's definitely an old trauma from the motherland, right? And the Republicans play that card beautifully about socialism and communism and all these things. There is proximity to whiteness, right? That you feel like this will get you as a part of the club, right? And you're tired of being looked at as lesser than. So this is your ticket to being a part of that club here in America. And I think the other thing, as I mentioned, we talk about machismo culture. I think a lot of these men couldn't bring themselves to see a woman, let alone a black woman, as somebody who could possibly be in a position of power like that. And I think also, much like young men, because that was another demographic, young white men, I think young men in general, navigating or being gravitating, I should say, towards Donald Trump. I think there is this reaction that a lot of men are having about what it means to be a man, and a lot of old toxic programming. And Donald Trump represents this old mindset of what it means to be a man, right? Be unapologetic, be insensitive, be a playboy, have the money, the cars, the women. This sort of just asshole mentality that I think has been adopted as a part of manhood, for generations. And I think that is attractive and speaks to a history of machismo culture in Latin America, right? Because that is right in line with what the previous generations have been taught, both men and women, right? Men being these strong bosses, and what they say goes. They're in charge, and women are supposed to be subservient. Women are supposed to do whatever they can to be a good wife, and essentially keep your mouth shut otherwise. And I think when the narrative that happens is that, men can't be men anymore, and this idea of feminism as a threat to men, you then have this sort of visceral reaction where there is this rebellion by a certain group, and I think we saw that with just men in general. I think young men, and there's a really interesting conversation, and I want to preface this. This is a bit touchy, and I want to preface what I'm going to say as or with the fact that I am somebody who believes in the idea that women are underpaid and undervalued. I believe women can do all of the same jobs as men. Personally, for me, I grew up under a strong woman who was a principal in the South Bronx, and that is sort of the idea of a woman that I have in my mind, a strong woman who, my mom was the boss in our household, right? And I'm proud of that. And I most definitely support the ideas and everything of feminism. But as I've mentioned before, and I think on this topic, but other ones, we also tend to have this overcorrection happening. And there's really interesting statistics and studies happening. And the author Scott Galloway brings this up, and I think it's quite fascinating, because he talks about the rise in violence amongst young men, and how young men are becoming more violent. Young men are becoming more introverted. They struggle more with addictions. And I think there's an interesting conversation to be had, because I've had this sort of argument with people in my life, and not even an argument, but like just a conversation. Those who are very much so in line with the feminist movement, but to the point of demeaning men. And I think we can 100% agree that men have brought this on themselves, that they have gatekept, they have mistreated women in unimaginable and disgusting ways for generations, and we've normalized it as people, as a society. But the answer to our problem is not then doing the same exact thing, just the opposite, right? The answer is not now women becoming in a position of power and then just completely shitting and demoralizing on men. And I'm not saying that this is like the reason why they I'm just saying, I think as we analyze like these different cohorts and why they were attracted, because you have to look, like the eye test, it's like, who in their right fucking mind would vote for this fucking convicted felon, misogynist, somebody who's been found legally liable for sexual assault, says crazy shit, is a bubbling idiot. So like there has to be real reasons why this person spoke to a group of people, and it'd be easy to write everybody off as idiots, even though I think a lot of people are just fucking idiots. We have to get into the psyche of why their stupidity is what it is, right? And I do believe there is a certain faction that is viewing Donald Trump as the savior to the idea that they are not valuable, essentially, right? Because there are real statistics, real studies. And again, this is just one group. I talk about Latin men. I'm kind of talking about young men in general here. Like, men are not going out anymore. They're not approaching, like, they're not meeting people. They're like, there's a giant porn addiction, problem. Men are staying in, playing video games, and not leaving that. Like, there's something really happening with the younger generation. And I think a lot of it is this narrative of them just being disgusting, like, creatures who offer nothing. And I get it, because oftentimes men are disgusting creatures who are taking from amazing women. But we have to have a balance, or else we end up creating these monsters, right? And I think that's what we have to be cognizant of. If we are not cognizant of the narrative that is going out there, you end up pushing people away, and they don't go anywhere, but they become violent, they become angry, they become disenfranchised. I mean, that's why, in general, somebody like Donald Trump went into power and got the following he did, because you had a sector of this country, a large sector, who felt like they were being ignored by Democrats. And this man spoke to their needs and wants and made them feel seen for the first time. And I think he did a lot of that with young men, Gen Z, in this country as well. I mean, you look at the podcast that he hit. The Joe Rogans of the world speak to that audience. The Nelk Boys, right? They're like the Full Send podcast. They're like these guys who were pranksters, and they have like this Happy Dad beer. They're gigantic amongst that sort of like alpha man, like the Andrew Tates of the world. There's a reason why somebody like Andrew Tate rises to such prominence, spewing his fucking stupidity, right? Because there's this sector of the world who feels like their manhood has been stripped away as well. And I think that those are interesting conversations to be had, and like, where is the balance with it and all. And I'm just kind of tackling, I think, conversations that are interesting that are happening as you do the exit polling, and why are people going in certain directions. I think also, beyond sort of where we are as a society and how certain societal groups feel more aligned with Donald Trump as a result of what they feel like they're struggling with. I also think the Democratic Party has to look itself in the mirror. And I think somebody like Joe Biden has to look himself in the mirror and say, I put our party at a disadvantage for my own selfishness. And by the way, I want to I want to put a point or a pin in that idea of what I was talking about young men, like especially young white men.
To put a pin on young white men, because I want to make sure I'm not like defending anything. What I'm saying is, like, these statistics, these studies show, and we've seen it when it comes to mass shootings and all these things, majority of them are committed by young white men, right? We have to figure out, why are there so many fucking angry people in this country that are racist, homophobic, want to commit violence and all these different things, and that are so susceptible to the messaging of somebody like Donald Trump? Because that's really, if the existential question that we need to be asking ourselves is, why did so many people and various demographics, why did his messaging speak to them in such a way that they went and supported him the way that they did? That, I think, was what is interesting to me. And again, when we talk about like moving forward as a country, we have to figure those things out, because it's only getting worse, essentially. And that's why I bring it up. Now, back to Biden. This is somebody who, when he first was elected, he made a promise. Basically, he was going to be a transitional president. He was going to be there, get everything back on track, and step aside that, for the younger generation, the next generation. And he went back on that promise and said, I'm running for re-election, and stuck it out until basically the 25th hour, if you will. And then, with 100 days left in the election, if I'm not mistaken, Kamala Harris was given the keys and had to scramble to put together this campaign. And that wasn't fair to her. That wasn't fair to the Democratic Party as a whole and the country as a whole. He really put us at a major disadvantage. And, I think I've said this from the start. She wouldn't have been my first choice. I believe she was far more qualified than somebody like Donald Trump. But had from the start he have kept his promise and recognized, I'm going to be far too old to do this for another 4 fucking years. And on top of that, I don't represent the future of this party anymore. Had he have been able to be okay with that, it would have given us the opportunity to have a primary, to have the best and brightest of the Democratic Party go at it. The winner would then have the normal amount of time to run a proper campaign. And who knows where we would be at the end of this, right? And I think that is the bigger conversation as well. If you're a Democrat, if you're somebody who normally votes Democrat, I think also the last thing I'll probably touch on as far as results coming out or conversations happening. A lot of the people were talking about the economy. And I know I saw a lot of the memes like, this person barely graduated high school, yet they're fucking talking about the economy and the irony of it all. And yes, but these are talking points that have been regurgitated to them that connected, that then they can use as their reason why they voted for Donald Trump. Right? And this is the failure of the Democratic Party. Because as Bernie Sanders said when he put out a statement, I think it was today, he talked about how the Democratic Party has lost sight of the working class people that they're supposed to represent. And it's a complex issue or a nuanced issue, if you will, because by every metric, the current American economy is incredibly strong. Joe Biden has set all types of record lows for things like,
employment rates and things like, record highs for employment rates, record lows for unemployment, right? And all kinds of things like that. Our GDP, is in good shape, and all these different things. But for the everyday person, that doesn't really move the needle, right? Because I think what Republicans did a good job at was targeting how expensive life is right now. And I think the Democrats went on a bit of defense mode with their messaging to say, oh, that's a lie. Joe Biden has one of the strongest economies ever. And to the everyday person, myself included, where the fuck is that money? Because I'm spending far more on basic goods than I ever have. When I look at the job market, companies aren't paying real wages, especially in particular areas where it's expensive to live. So who is getting the benefits of this? And I don't say that as like, oh, people are lying, that like, they're lying about the numbers being great, but the numbers seem to only really be great for a particular group of people. Now, I am well-read enough to understand it's bigger than just the president. The reason why milk is more expensive, or gas, or whatever that might be, is not because of Joe Biden's economy. Much of it is because of price gouging. Much of the reason why people aren't able to afford things is because companies are not paying them what they deserve and overpaying their CEOs. That they're not giving raises like they did when I was growing up in the 90s. When I would watch as my dad got his Christmas bonus and expected a yearly raise. When I entered the workforce, that was done. That's really what's happening. And I think the Democrats failed at finding a villain for why you and I are not where we want to be financially and why so many people are struggling. Because I think it instead of pointing the finger to the actual problem, they got defensive and said, hey, look at all we're doing. But those numbers on a piece of paper or a statistic doesn't transfer over when I go to Trader Joe's and I'm spending $200 every 2 weeks in a single person household. And I think that is where the Democrats failed as well. They failed to reach their base with the proper messaging. And I think part of that, and I believe Bernie even mentioned this, but part of that was playing too much so to the elites. Because I think they needed to go full kamikaze mode and call out these fucking corporate, greedy bastards, essentially. But the problem with the Democrats is they always are trying to walk the line because they're playing politics as well. And I get it. It literally is politics. It's a nasty game. But if you're afraid to call out these corporate people because you're scared they won't support you and financially and all these different things, you're doing it at the expense of your base. And you have to figure out how to be effective be better, I guess, in both areas. How do we not completely ruin relationships with corporations that we are powerful and we need as a country, while still fighting and advocating for the rights of the everyday person? And I don't think they've found or figured out that balance. And it made them a very easy target for someone like Trump to say, look how much money you're spending on basic goods under this presidency. And of course, it's nuanced when we're coming off a fucking global pandemic and all these different things. But there is a disconnect in the messaging. I mean, shit. This didn't make nearly enough headlines, but like even simple things. What are the things that, like, on a plane? I talk about this all the time because it's nauseating to me that nobody fucking is in an uproar about this on a regular basis. all the fucking fees and the what they're charging you to carry a bag, and every time you go on a plane, now you're getting charged to fucking have a carry-on. You have to upgrade your seat, like all these little fucking things while providing you the bare minimal service. And now they had passed something where airlines have to immediately refund a customer for delays and for cancellations, right? They can no longer drag it out and make the customer have to figure it out. Like if they fuck up, you're getting your money back right then and there, essentially. That should have been a big headline. In fact, they should have heavily pressed down on the airline industry. Those are things that affect the everyday person that you could have done to really make it a point to say, hey, we are out here fighting tooth and nail for the shit that affects your everyday fucking life, right? And that is where they failed. And don't get me wrong, Kamala had some great plans for home ownership, for small businesses, but I think it was overshadowed by the Biden administration these last 4 years, inflation and all these different things. And what a lot of people are saying, and I agree with to a degree, she didn't do enough to separate herself from Joe Biden. She always sort of wanted to be as respectful as possible and big him up as much as possible. But I think that also hurt her in the end, because a lot of people are saying life is really tough right now. And I need to know what drastic difference you're going to be as opposed to the current thing. Right? So again, I think she had to say, hey, I'm going to actually be aggressive towards corporate. And I know, again, there were certain messaging that was put out there. And I believe she even had a plan, a price gouging plan. But it was like not delivered enough. I think I feel like Charlamagne says this a lot, but the Democrats suck at messaging. For whatever reason, they're not connecting and beating it into people's heads. We care about the economy and prices, and this is what we're going to do. And that is a failure of them meeting the audience where it's at, where it's going to be. And I think this election proves people are okay with supporting a racist. They're okay with supporting a misogynist. They're okay with potentially not having a democracy as we know it, as long as it doesn't affect their bottom line financially, or as long as financially they're going to reap the benefit of it. They're okay with laying in bed with all these different things as long as it means they're going to be better. They're going to be better off financially, right? I think too much emphasis was placed on being a moral character in comparison to Donald Trump and not speaking to what people actually give a fuck about the most, unfortunately, because I don't think this way, but unfortunately, and that is, their bottom line, their money. So that's kind of, I guess, my review of where we fell short and maybe why people voted the way that they did. And I'm going to touch on Puerto Rico real quick. So we'll do that. But first, we'll take another quick break, and then we'll be right back. All right, we are back, and I want to touch on Puerto Rico real quick because they also had their election. They elected a new governor, and this was a very contested election. For the first time in its history, the third party, the independent party, actually had a real candidate that was giving a run for their money to the statehood party, the pro-statehood party. Now, at the end of the day, unfortunately, Jennifer Gonzalez, part of the PNP, the pro-statehood party, she ended up winning the election, but it was incredibly close. And it's obviously disappointing, particularly because, like, literally the day after, this was like yesterday, Mitch McConnell was speaking and said that they were not going to be creating any new states out of fear, basically, of it being something in favor of the Democratic Party. And they were speaking essentially about Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico. They fear that they will become Democratic states, therefore putting the Republicans at a disadvantage. So the irony that this person and Jennifer Gonzalez and many of the people who voted for her were running on and supporting on the idea of the statehood's going to happen for them, instant karma in your face for fucking looking for the white man to save you. So, yeah, disappointing in that regard. This could have been real change for the island of Puerto Rico. Unfortunately, this is actually the party that's been in power since 2017. And they're a party of corrupt idiots, essentially. And they have done little to nothing for the island of Puerto Rico. And Juan Dalmau, who was the independent candidate, who represented independence for the island, that was the political party he represents, he wanted actual change for Puerto Rico. He wanted to really make Puerto Rico a far more self-sustaining island, create industry that would create more jobs, become less reliant. His goal was to become less reliant on federal funds, which would eventually allow Puerto Rico to move into being its own thing, which is the greater goal. Unfortunately, much like what Donald Trump did here, Jennifer Gonzalez, who is a fan of Trump, she played the fear card, made people fear that if they voted for independence, the independent candidate, that they would become like Cuba, they would become, this third world country and all these different things. And that fear tactic worked, particularly on the older generation. And as a result, Puerto Rico will now have 4 more years of basically the same bullshit over and over again. So, yeah, that's the update there, unfortunately. But again, on a positive note, history was still made, because they actually also had a vote. So they have a non-binding vote to gauge people's perspective: statehood versus independence versus status quo. And usually statehood wins outright, and most people actually don't even participate. But this was the first time you actually had it jumped from, in the previous 2020 election, 2% of the people who participated voted for statehood. This time 30-something% voted. So it's a gigantic leap forward in that direction. And not that many people participated in this as well, but they kind of had a non-binding vote. Who would you vote for if you were you could vote for president? And a large majority said Kamala. So speaking to Republicans' fears that Puerto Rico would be a democratic state, therefore they don't want it to be a state. Listen, people are obsessed with the white savior. I don't know what to tell you. It's a sad reality that we live in. But yeah, that's where we are. With that said, let's tie everything we talked about today in a neat little bow in a segment we call Conclusion Stew.
Time for Conclusion Stew.
All right, y'all. So we got in the thick of it. I think, I don't know. I want to bring comfort to people. All I can really say is, we keep pushing. We keep fighting for what's right. We find comfort in the fact that we know we are on the right side of history. I know that doesn't stop bad things from happening. I know that doesn't calm the fears or the real reality of what this means for women. But I think we just have to do what we've always done in these difficult situations: is you gravitate towards your community, those who see you and support you as you are, the safe spaces that exist for us. We come together. We continue to support one another in any way that we possibly can, and be vigilant, mindful. And I have my dad is freaking out and wants to move and move all their money into euros and all this shit. And I don't make rash decisions. That's really what I can say. Is you try to move from a place of stillness. I know it's frustrating. I know it's scary. I think it's important to, like I said, be vigilant and keep an eye on all that's going on once he gets into office, and plans and projects that are being proposed and implemented. But I think for now we try to move from a place of stillness, and God forbid it gets to that bad place that so many people fear it may get to, particularly for those of us in our community. Then you do what's best for you and your family. But as difficult as it is, personally, I'm trying not to panic. I'm just trying to make smart decisions financially, be smart, save, and work my hardest to create opportunity for myself over these next few months that will hopefully put me in a privileged position where, God forbid, I need to make a big decision, I will be in the place to do so. And I think that's the best advice I can give anybody. And, anybody who's bummed, disappointed, you're not the only one. And I think we just continue to surround ourselves with positive people, with those that we love, those that we can let our guard down around, and set boundaries accordingly is all we could really do. But I love you all, and I'm right here with you. And, as always, we are a community, and we are in this together. And I hope this hour brought any sort of calmness or just reaffirmed how you're feeling in some sort of way. But we are in this together. So with that said, I'll catch you on Tuesday with a brand new episode. Till then, stay safe, try to have a great weekend, and we will talk soon. Peace.